Ava Whitmore was the glamorous wife of a New York billionaire. Elijah Cross was a magnetic megachurch pastor with a secret past. Their forbidden affair shocked the city's elite, but no one expected it to end with Ava found dead in her bathtub and Elijah accused of murder. What really happened behind closed doors in the sanctuary of Redeemer Heights? And how did love, lies, and power lead to one of the most chilling scandals in Manhattan's high society? Ava Whitmore had everything most people only dream about. Born into old money and married into even more, she lived in a penthouse on Manhattan's Upper East Side, a home adorned with crystal chandeliers, museum-worthy art, and views that swept across Central Park. Her days were scheduled with designer fittings, brunches at the Mark Hotel, and charity committee meetings, where names like Rockefeller and Astor were thrown around casually. Her husband, Charles Whitmore, was a titan in the hedge fund world, commanding billions in assets and the attention of Wall Street. Their marriage, at least on paper, was a picture of elite success, elegant, composed, and free of scandal. But beneath the glimmering surface of her perfect life, Ava was deeply unhappy. Charles spent more time in Dubai and Singapore than in New York. His schedule was dictated by markets, mergers, and meetings, not by anniversaries or affection. The warmth that had once existed between them had evaporated, replaced by polite dinners and empty conversation. Ava had no children to occupy her time, no real purpose beyond maintaining appearances. She had grown bored, restless, and emotionally starved, and in a world where showing weakness was taboo, she kept it all to herself. One Sunday morning, alone in the penthouse while Charles was in Geneva, Ava flipped through TV channels absent-mindedly. She paused on a live-streamed church service, not something she normally watched. The preacher on the screen had a commanding presence. He spoke not like a typical pastor, but like someone who knew how to hold a room, confident, dynamic, captivating. His name flashed across the screen, Pastor Elijah Cross of Redeemer Heights Church. He spoke about loss, emptiness, and the soul's hunger for something real. Ava felt strangely seen. Curious, she decided to attend in person the following Sunday. She had not set foot in a church in years. Redeemer Heights was nothing like the churches she remembered from childhood. It was modern, sleek, and filled with an upscale crowd, fashion editors, finance executives, even a few Broadway actors. It was a place of faith, yes, but also of influence. And at the center of it all was Elijah Cross, tall, magnetic, and dressed in tailored suits instead of robes. His words felt intimate, as if he were speaking directly to her. Each sermon touched on the emotions she had buried: isolation, dissatisfaction, longing for connection. He offered not just spirituality, but validation. Ava kept coming back. Week after week, she began to arrange her schedule around church events. Soon she was invited to a private women's mentorship group, led by none other than Elijah himself. The group was small, selective, and focused on spiritual growth, but Ava suspected its real purpose was something more personal. Elijah was charming in a way that felt both spiritual and sensual. He listened when she spoke, looked into her eyes longer than necessary, and always made her feel like she mattered. That was a rarity in Ava's life. As the weeks went on, their connection deepened. He began texting her privately, offering to pray for her, check in on her, and invite her to exclusive meetings. Ava felt alive again. The butterflies in her stomach were unfamiliar after so many years of emotional numbness. She started changing her appearance, wearing bolder colors, tighter dresses, more daring heels. Friends noticed the shift, but dismissed it as Ava simply rediscovering herself. Only Ava knew how deep her feelings had grown. But this was more than just a crush. She began fantasizing about a life with Elijah, one where she could leave behind the cold marble walls of her penthouse and step into something warmer, more real. It felt dangerous, but thrilling. For the first time in years, Ava felt like she had a secret worth keeping. She didn't realize she was stepping into something far darker than she could ever imagine. Ava's infatuation with Pastor Elijah Cross didn't fade. It intensified with every encounter. What began as admiration soon morphed into something more consuming. She started finding excuses to be at the church even when there were no services, volunteering for outreach programs, attending planning meetings, hosting small prayer gatherings in her home. She immersed herself in the church world entirely, and everywhere she turned, Elijah was there, greeting her with a soft smile, resting his hand a second too long on her shoulder, slipping notes into her Bible with words that felt intimate and charged with hidden meaning. The thrill of secrecy made it all the more addictive. No one outside the church had any idea. Charles was still consumed with business travel and investor meetings. Their conversations had grown even more hollow. Sometimes Ava would catch herself watching him across the dining table and wonder how she had ever fallen in love with him. He had become a figure in her life, not a partner. Elijah, by contrast, made her feel chosen. When she received late-night messages from him quoting scripture that doubled as poetry, she interpreted them as signs, clues that he felt the same desire, the same need. But Ava's emotions, though deeply sincere, were not reciprocated with the same purity. What she didn't know was that Elijah Cross was no stranger to women like her. Elegant, affluent, emotionally abandoned. He knew how to read them, how to charm them, how to extract what he wanted without ever appearing to ask. He had done it before and would do it again. Ava, for all her beauty and wealth, was simply the next chapter in a playbook he had mastered long ago. As her feelings intensified, so did her dependence. She began isolating from her social circle. Friends who once shared lunches and spa days noticed her absence. She skipped galas and stopped returning calls. When she did appear, she was distracted, checking her phone constantly, smiling at messages no one else could see. She turned cold when anyone mentioned Charles. Some speculated about a possible affair, though none could imagine Ava getting involved with someone from the church. That part of her life seemed too sacred. But Ava was slipping deeper into obsession. She started journaling feverishly, pouring out fantasies about a life with Elijah. She imagined the two of them leaving New York together, building a new ministry as a couple, becoming a symbol of redemptive love. She began wondering aloud, only to herself, if she should leave Charles. She even looked into legal separation, though she hadn't taken any action. Her imagination painted a future where passion replaced duty, and Elijah replaced the emptiness that had grown in her marriage. It wasn't long before the image began to crack. Ava noticed inconsistencies in Elijah's behavior. He sometimes avoided her for days, then returned with an explanation about being on a spiritual retreat or needing space to hear from God. There were hushed conversations in the church hallways she wasn't a part of, glances exchanged between staff members when she entered a room. She tried to ignore the unease, but it lingered. Then came the church intern, Natalie. Natalie was young, bright, and unusually close to Elijah. Ava had seen them talking after services, standing a little too close, laughing in ways that felt familiar. She told herself she was imagining things, but the pit in her stomach grew heavier. One Sunday, Natalie didn't show up. Then a week passed. Then two. The church made a vague announcement about her taking a personal sabbatical, but Ava didn't buy it. Something felt wrong. One afternoon, Ava visited Elijah's private office under the pretense of delivering a thank-you gift. He wasn't there, but the door was unlocked. As she looked around the room, she noticed his laptop still open. Her curiosity overcame her judgment. She clicked on the email tab and saw a message from Natalie, one that hadn't been deleted yet. The subject line read, "Please stop." The message was short, panicked, and direct. Natalie accused Elijah of crossing boundaries, of manipulating women who came to him for help. She said she was afraid, that she wanted no further contact. Ava's breath caught in her throat. For the first time, the man she had idealized began to look like someone else, someone dangerous. Still, she wanted to believe he could explain. She convinced herself there was a reasonable story behind it. She confronted him days later. He told her Natalie had mental health issues, that she was unstable, that she had made wild accusations against others before. Ava nodded, smiled, tried to believe him, but doubt had taken root, and that doubt would grow into something much darker. Ava's love wasn't enough to blind her completely anymore. She had started to question the man behind the sermons and what she might have gotten herself into. The whisper of suspicion in Ava's mind began as a murmur, but soon turned into a constant roar. After reading Natalie's desperate email and watching Elijah skillfully deflect her concerns with the ease of a man practiced in covering his tracks, Ava could no longer ignore the feeling that something wasn't right. For the first time, she pulled herself back emotionally, not enough to leave the relationship, but enough to watch more closely. She still wanted to believe him. She still wanted the dream. But a voice in her head, quiet, persistent, kept telling her to look deeper. She didn't tell anyone what she had discovered. Even her therapist, a woman she had confided in for over a decade, remained in the dark. Ava needed answers before she could speak the truth aloud, and so, behind her expensive sunglasses and flawless designer wardrobe, she began conducting her own investigation. The more she looked, the more she uncovered. Not directly. Elijah was too careful for that. But in the fragments of stories whispered by former church members, in social media posts hastily deleted, in gaps between what people said and what they really meant. But Ava was a woman accustomed to getting results. She hired a private investigator, discreetly, through a security firm that also worked for high-profile clients. She didn't tell him the full story at first, only that she believed someone in her life was lying to her, and she needed to know the truth. The investigator, a middle-aged former NYPD detective named Grant, agreed to take the case with little detail. Ava handed over everything she had: photos, email printouts, times, names. Within a week, Grant had something. He traced Elijah's travel history and found several questionable trips: private events in Miami, spiritual retreats in Los Angeles, speaking engagements in Chicago. The same pattern repeated: high-profile women in each city, wealthy donors, and sudden severed ties. One of them, a prominent art dealer in Miami, had written a blog post 2 years earlier about being manipulated by a man of God, but deleted it soon after posting. Another woman, a philanthropist in Chicago, had donated over $100,000, 0 cents, to Redeemer Heights before resigning from the church without explanation. Then there was the most alarming discovery. A woman named Cynthia Bell, a former news anchor from Atlanta, had been involved with a pastor matching Elijah's description. She had died 18 months prior. Her death was ruled a suicide, an overdose. Grant dug deeper. Cynthia had left behind no suicide note, no history of drug use, and no known mental health diagnoses. Her family had always believed something was off, but the investigation never went anywhere. There was no direct evidence of wrongdoing, only suspicion and a lack of answers. When Grant presented all of this to Ava, she sat silently, staring at the documents laid out before her like a jigsaw puzzle that suddenly revealed a sinister image. Still, she hesitated. Love, or the illusion of it, has a way of clouding judgment. Ava couldn't reconcile the man who had held her hand in prayer, who had spoken so passionately about divine love, with the cold predator these documents suggested. She asked Grant to keep digging. She needed more. In the meantime, Ava kept up appearances. She attended church as usual, smiling when necessary, pretending as though everything was fine, but internally she had begun to unravel. She no longer trusted Elijah's words, his sermons, or his touch. Each time he looked at her, she wondered if he could sense the distance, the fear. He was too intelligent not to notice something had changed. Then, one afternoon, Grant called her with a tone that Ava had never heard from him before. Tight, urgent, sharp. He had uncovered something new. A woman from within the Redeemer Heights Church had filed a sealed civil complaint against Elijah 5 years earlier. The case had been settled privately. The details were disturbing: emotional manipulation, financial coercion, claims of an inappropriate physical relationship blurred under the language of spiritual counseling. And though no criminal charges had been filed, the pattern was undeniable. Ava realized that she had become part of something dangerous, something deceptive and carefully hidden. She was not the exception. She was part of a cycle, a deliberate and calculated one. She could no longer stay silent. She gathered the files, the emails, the evidence Grant had collected and began assembling a plan. She wouldn't confront Elijah again directly. Instead, she scheduled a meeting with the church board. She intended to expose everything. She had no idea that someone already knew, and that someone was watching her every move. It was the Sunday before Christmas, and Redeemer Heights Church was adorned with garlands, candles, and soft golden lights that made the sanctuary feel more like a high-end event venue than a house of worship. The pews were packed. Wealthy donors, political figures, celebrities, and the city's elite filled the room, dressed in winter coats and designer scarves. Ava Whitmore walked in wearing a striking red dress that turned heads as she moved down the aisle. She looked flawless, composed, elegant, glowing with quiet confidence. But beneath the surface, Ava was a storm. She had spent the past few nights in near isolation, poring over documents, rereading the investigators' findings, and preparing herself for what had to be done. The manila envelope tucked neatly inside her designer handbag held everything: printed emails, financial records, photos, and a typed letter addressed to the church board. She hadn't slept much. Her mind ran in circles, playing out every possible reaction: denial, outrage, cover-ups, but she felt resolute. This couldn't stay hidden anymore. She had lived in fantasy for too long. Elijah took the stage like he always did, confident and radiant under the lights. His voice rang out with warmth, weaving words about redemption, rebirth, and the meaning of love. He was mesmerizing, as he had always been. But Ava didn't hear the words anymore. She watched his body language, his expressions, his careful pauses. Every smile he gave now felt rehearsed. Every scripture he quoted felt hollow. After the service, there was a brief reception in the church's glass-walled atrium. Ava moved through the crowd gracefully, exchanging pleasantries with women she once shared charity boards with, sipping champagne, nodding politely. Elijah approached her, as he always did, arms open, his tone smooth and familiar. But this time, Ava didn't melt into the attention. She kept her responses short, her smile distant. She saw something flicker across his face, maybe confusion, maybe suspicion. The meeting with the board was scheduled for the next morning. Ava had requested it formally through the church administrator, citing urgent concerns related to leadership conduct. She didn't include details. She didn't need to. The envelope would speak for itself. She went home that evening with a strange mix of fear and relief. This was almost over. The mask was about to come off. The penthouse was quiet when she arrived. Charles was still abroad, away on a business trip in Hong Kong. The staff had gone home for the holidays. Ava moved through the apartment, placing the envelope on her bedroom dresser and preparing for a bath. She filled the tub, lit a few candles, and poured in lavender oil. She had always used long baths to unwind, but this time it was different. It was the calm before a storm she was walking straight into. She never made it out of that tub alive. Sometime after midnight, a neighbor on the floor below reported a strange electrical sound and a brief flicker of the lights. Hours later, the building's doorman received a call from Ava's housekeeper, who couldn't get inside. Security used the emergency key to open the door. The sight was horrifying. Ava's lifeless body submerged in the water. A hairdryer floating beside her. The tub had overflowed slightly, spilling onto the marble floor. Police arrived and began their assessment. No forced entry, no signs of struggle, The hairdryer appeared to have fallen from the countertop into the water. A tragic accident, they said, a freak incident. The file was marked accordingly. But nothing about it made sense to Chloe, Ava's younger sister. She was the one who received the first call from police. She was also the one who knew how cautious Ava had always been with electronics. She remembered Ava once refusing to plug in a curling iron unless it was 10 feet away from any water. It wasn't just out of character, it felt orchestrated. While helping to clear out Ava's belongings a few days later, Chloe opened the dresser drawer and found the envelope. She recognized Ava's handwriting on the cover. Curious, she opened it and began reading. Her hands trembled as she scanned page after page of names, dates, bank transfers, and allegations. She called the police immediately. This was no accident. This was a warning. Ava hadn't just died. She had been silenced. The envelope Chloe found would change everything. What had initially been dismissed as a tragic accident was now unraveling into something far more sinister. She handed the documents over to investigators, refusing to be brushed aside like just another grieving relative. Chloe was nothing like Ava in personality. She was sharper, more skeptical, and deeply suspicious of the world Ava had inhabited. And now, as she read the notes her sister had meticulously compiled, her suspicion had turned into a quiet fury. The detectives who reopened the case didn't want to admit they had missed something. But it was all there in Ava's handwriting. Names, amounts of money donated to Redeemer Heights Church, records of private meetings with Elijah Cross, references to other women, and even screenshots of messages Ava had exchanged with the private investigator. One detail stood out. Ava had written about receiving veiled threats. At least twice in the weeks before her death, she had mentioned seeing someone watching her from outside her building. She had also reported her car alarm going off repeatedly without explanation. Small things, easy to dismiss, but in hindsight, they weren't random. Detectives dug into the building's surveillance system. At first glance, there was nothing unusual on the night of Ava's death. No one had signed in, and the cameras near the front entrance showed nothing out of the ordinary. But when investigators pulled footage from the garage entrance, the one few people ever used, they noticed a hooded figure entering the building at 10:52 p.m., less than an hour before Ava died. The person used a stolen key fob. His face wasn't visible, but the timing aligned too perfectly to ignore. The figure was never seen leaving the way he came in. A forensic sweep of Ava's penthouse turned up something else. A partial fingerprint on the cord of the hairdryer. It was faint, distorted by the water and heat, but with advanced scanning it yielded a hit. A partial match to an item once used by Elijah Cross during a public event. It wasn't enough for an arrest, but it was enough to pull him in for questioning. Elijah didn't flinch. Sitting in a tailored suit, he spoke calmly, claiming he hadn't seen Ava the night of her death, hadn't been near her building in weeks. He said he had loved her in a spiritual sense, that she had struggled emotionally, and that she was prone to dramatic decisions. He pointed to her wealth, her pressure-filled life, the emptiness that could come with privilege. He implied that her death, though tragic, might have been her own doing. He was smooth, confident, but the detectives weren't convinced. They secured warrants for his phone, email, and financial records. What they found built a damning case. Text messages he thought had been deleted revealed coded language sent to a burner phone the same night Ava died. A GPS history showed he had turned off location services for 2 hours that evening. Financial records showed that a separate account, not listed under the church, had been receiving large, unexplained transfers. Ava's name appeared in those transfers too. When the evidence was presented to a grand jury, it didn't take long. Elijah Cross was arrested in the middle of a Sunday service, with cameras rolling and a packed church watching. The footage spread like wildfire. A man once revered as a spiritual leader was now a suspect in a high-profile murder investigation. The trial would become one of the most talked-about court cases of the year. Witness after witness testified. Former church interns, emotionally damaged women from other cities, even staff members who admitted they had been too afraid to speak out. The prosecution painted a picture of a man who used God as a shield to manipulate, exploit, and control. A man who saw women like Ava as stepping stones in his rise to power. The jury deliberated for less than a day. Elijah Cross was found guilty of first-degree murder, fraud, and obstruction of justice. He was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. In the end, Ava Whitmore was remembered not just as a socialite or a victim, but as the woman who had nearly uncovered the truth, who had dared to challenge a man everyone else feared. Her death was a tragedy, but her courage exposed a monster hiding behind Scripture. And it forced a city to confront the darkness that had been living in the light all along.